There's a very specific moment in a relationship where a man goes from slightly worried about losing you to completely unbothered, and most women never notice when it happens. One day he was attentive, responsive, making effort, and then quietly, without any dramatic announcement, he stopped. Not because he stopped caring, but because somewhere along the line, you made it very clear that you weren't going anywhere. And that's the trap. Men are wired to pursue what feels valuable and protect what feels scarce. It's not a character flaw. It's just how male attraction actually operates under the surface. When a woman is always available, always accommodating, always emotionally accessible, no matter how little effort he puts in, his brain files her under secured. And secured things don't get pursued, they get assumed. This video isn't about playing games. It's not about manufacturing fake distance or pretending to be someone you're not. Every single thing on this list works because it's rooted in something real: self-worth, personal identity, genuine standards. The women who make men genuinely afraid of losing them aren't running manipulation tactics. They're just living in a way that makes their absence feel like an actual loss. There's a difference between a woman a man likes having around and a woman a man cannot imagine being without. 9 differences, actually. 1. Stop being so available. Availability is one of those things that feels like love when you're giving it, but reads as low value when it's received without effort. And most women don't realize this until they're already deep in a dynamic where the man has completely stopped trying. Because why would he try? Everything he wants from the relationship shows up automatically, on demand, regardless of what he does or doesn't do to earn it. This is not about being cold. It's not about leaving texts on read for 3 days to seem mysterious. That's a game, and games have a way of backfiring spectacularly. This is about something far more grounded, genuinely having a life that competes with your availability, when your schedule is full because you're actually living, when you don't respond instantly because you're actually busy, when you can't always drop everything because you actually have things worth not dropping. That's not a tactic. That's a lifestyle, and it registers completely differently in a man's brain. Male psychology responds to perceived scarcity in a very specific way. When something is abundantly available with zero conditions attached, the brain assigns it a lower value, not out of cruelty, but out of pure behavioral economics. It's the same reason people value things they had to work for more than things that were handed to them. Effort creates attachment. Easy access creates assumptions, and assumptions are where relationships go to slowly suffocate. Research in relationship dynamics consistently shows that men report higher levels of attraction and emotional investment toward partners who maintain independent lives and are not perpetually accessible. It's not that absence makes the heart grow fonder in some poetic sense. It's that absence creates space for a man to actually feel your presence when it shows up. If you're always there, he never gets to miss you. And a man who never misses you never gets to realize what losing you would actually feel like. The woman who's always available trains a man to expect her. The woman who shows up fully when she's present, but has genuine places to be when she's not, trains a man to appreciate her. One dynamic produces comfort, the other produces value, and only one of those makes a man quietly nervous about what happens if she decides her time belongs somewhere else. So the first move isn't dramatic, it's almost boring. Fill your life up, make your schedule mean something. Let your time have actual weight, because a man will only worry about losing access to something that isn't guaranteed. The moment your presence becomes a given, his effort becomes optional. And optional effort has a very predictable ending. 2. Have a life he can't fully access. There is a specific kind of discomfort a man feels when he realizes the woman he's with has an entire world that exists completely independently of him. Not a threatening world, not a suspicious world, just a full, rich, genuinely engaging life that was there before him and will continue with or without his participation. That discomfort has a name in male psychology. It's called the fear of irrelevance, and it is one of the most powerful motivators a man has when it comes to showing up properly in a relationship. Most women, somewhere in the process of falling for someone, make a quiet and almost unconscious mistake. They start reorganizing their life around the man. The girls' nights become less frequent. The hobbies that used to consume whole weekends get quietly shelved. The friendships that required real time and energy get slowly deprioritized. It all feels natural because it comes from a genuine place. She's invested, she wants to spend time with him, she's happy. But what she doesn't realize is that every piece of her independent life she trades in is a piece of her perceived value walking out the door. Because here's what men actually find quietly unsettling, in the best possible way, about a woman who has a life he can't fully access. He can't predict her. He can't take her for granted because he's never entirely sure what she's doing, who she's with, what she's building, what she's experiencing without him. That uncertainty isn't anxiety inducing in a negative sense, it's activating. It keeps his attention engaged because she remains genuinely interesting. She didn't hand him the complete picture on day one and then stop evolving. She keeps adding chapters he hasn't read yet. Psychological research on long term attraction identifies self expansion opportunity as one of the key drivers of sustained romantic interest in men. Simply put, men stay attracted to women who continue to expose them to new experiences, perspectives, and dimensions of personality over time. A woman who has passions, friendships, goals, and interests outside the relationship is constantly generating new material. She doesn't run out of depth because she's actively living, not just waiting to be chosen. The friendships matter, the career ambitions matter, the solo trips matter, the random hobby she picked up that he knows nothing about matters, not because they make her seem impressive, but because they make her seem complete. A complete woman doesn't have a man-shaped hole in the center of her identity that she needs filled. She has a full life that she's generously inviting him into. And a man who's smart enough to recognize that distinction understands very clearly what it would mean to get uninvited. You don't have to be mysterious on purpose. Just be genuinely full and let him figure out that he's a welcome addition to something that was already working without him. 3. Stop over-explaining yourself. This one is going to sting a little for a specific type of woman, the one who genuinely believes that if she just explains herself clearly enough, thoroughly enough, logically enough, the man will finally understand her perspective and respond the way she needs him to. So she over-explains, she over-justifies, she constructs entire emotional arguments for why she feels the way she feels, why she made the decision she made, why her boundary is actually reasonable if he'd just look at it from her angle. And every single time she does this, she hands him something she doesn't realize she's handing him: leverage. Here's why. When a woman constantly explains and justifies herself to a man, she is subconsciously communicating that his approval of her choices is required before those choices are valid. She's essentially submitting her decisions for his review. And men, even good men, even men who aren't consciously trying to take advantage, will unconsciously begin to treat that approval position as real. He starts to feel like his opinion about her life, her feelings, and her boundaries carries veto power. Not because he demanded it, because she kept presenting her case like he was the judge. Confidence doesn't explain itself. That's not arrogance. That's just how self-assurance actually behaves in practice. A woman who makes a decision and stands behind it calmly, without a 3-paragraph justification, communicates something to a man's subconscious that no amount of explaining ever could. It says her internal validation system is fully operational and does not require his input to function. That is, quietly, one of the most attractive and simultaneously unsettling things a woman can project, because it removes him from a position of influence he may not have even realized he was occupying. Behavioral psychology describes this dynamic through the concept of approval-seeking behavior, a pattern where individuals repeatedly seek external validation for internal decisions, which progressively erodes their perceived confidence and social value in the eyes of others. In romantic relationships specifically, partners who consistently over-explain their choices are perceived as less secure, less decisive, and ultimately less challenging to take for granted. The brain reads constant justification as insecurity dressed up in words. The shift is simple, but not easy. Make your decision, communicate it clearly, stop at the period. No appendix, no footnotes, no follow-up email explaining the footnotes. "I'm not available that day" is a complete sentence. "I'm not comfortable with that" requires no supporting documentation. "That doesn't work for me" is not a rough draft that needs revision based on his feedback. The woman who over-explains is always auditioning. The woman who speaks and stops is already cast. And a man who senses he has no editorial control over her choices will start to wonder, for the first time, whether his presence in her life is something she chose deliberately, or something she'd replace without losing much sleep. That wondering, that's exactly where you want him. 4. Let him see you're desired by others. Before anyone misreads this is not about flirting with other men in front of your partner, manufacturing fake attention, or staging scenarios designed to make him jealous. That's immature, transparent, and it usually backfires in the most embarrassing ways possible. Bad day to be your credibility when he figures out the performance. What this is actually about is something far more organic, far more powerful, and requires zero manipulation to produce. Simply living visibly, unapologetically, and letting the natural reality of your social value show up on its own. Because here's what most women don't fully understand about male psychology and competition. Men are wired at a deeply evolutionary level to reassess the value of a partner the moment they receive external confirmation that other people find her desirable. It's not logical. It doesn't always make rational sense, even to the men experiencing it. But the moment a man sees, genuinely sees, not in a staged way, that other people are drawn to his woman, something shifts in his brain almost involuntarily. She stops being a secured asset and starts feeling like a contested one, and contested things get protected. Evolutionary psychologists call this mate guarding behavior. A set of instinctive responses triggered in men when they perceive a potential rival interest in their partner. Studies consistently show that men who were shown evidence of third party attraction toward their partner reported significantly higher levels of emotional investment, attentiveness, and relationship effort in the immediate aftermath. His brain essentially recalculated her value based on new market information, and the math came out higher than he'd been treating her. The practical version of this isn't complicated. It's going out with friends and being genuinely social. It's having male colleagues who respect and enjoy working with you. It's being the kind of woman who lights up a room naturally, not for his benefit, but because that's just who she is when she's fully herself. It's letting him see a compliment land without deflecting it immediately to make him comfortable. It's existing in public like a woman who knows her worth, because she actually does. What makes this work is authenticity. A man can sense performance from a significant distance. If the attention you're receiving is genuine, because you're genuinely magnetic, genuinely accomplished, genuinely engaging, he feels it differently than if it's being orchestrated. Real social desirability doesn't need a director. It just needs you to stop shrinking yourself to make him feel like the most interesting person in every room you both occupy. The woman who dims her light to keep a man comfortable ends up with a man who got comfortable in the dark. The woman who shines without apology ends up with a man who suddenly remembers exactly why he wanted to be near that light in the first place, and gets very, very focused on making sure nobody else gets closer to it than he does. 5. Raise your standards out loud. Most women make one of two mistakes when it comes to standards. Either they have them privately, but never communicate them, hoping a man will somehow intuitively figure out what's acceptable and what isn't. Or they explode them out during an emotional argument, which immediately reframes a standard as a reaction rather than a position. Both approaches produce the same outcome. The man doesn't take the standard seriously because it was never delivered in a way that demanded to be taken seriously. There is a third way, and it's the one that actually works. Communicating standards calmly, clearly, and early, not as a threat, not as an emotional ultimatum, not as a response to something he already did wrong, is one of the most psychologically powerful moves a woman can make in a relationship dynamic. It reframes the entire conversation. Instead of her standards being something he has to manage or navigate around, they become the terms of the relationship, the baseline, the floor below which things simply don't function. And a man who hears a woman communicate her standards that clearly, that early, that unbothered, his brain registers something important. This woman knows what she deserves, and she's not negotiating it. The distinction between a standard and an ultimatum is not about the content. It's about the emotional delivery and the timing. An ultimatum sounds like, if you do that one more time, I'm leaving. Spoken at peak emotional temperature, after the boundary has already been crossed repeatedly, with a voice that's shaking slightly because part of her isn't sure she means it. A standard sounds like, that's not something I'm willing to accept in a relationship. Spoken calmly, early, with the energy of a woman making a factual statement about herself, rather than issuing a warning to a man who's already misbehaving. Behavioral research on relationship dynamics consistently shows that partners who establish clear expectations early in a relationship experience significantly lower rates of boundary violations over time. It's not magic, it's just that clear standards eliminate the ambiguity men use, consciously or not, to justify low effort behavior. When the line is visible and she's shown she's comfortable standing behind it, crossing it becomes a deliberate choice with obvious consequences. Most men, when they actually value the woman, won't make that choice. What raises the fear of loss specifically is when a man realizes her standards aren't flexible based on how much she likes him. That's the part that gets uncomfortable for him. Because most men, somewhere along the line, have encountered women whose standards dissolved under the right amount of attention or charm. So when he meets a woman whose standards remain exactly where she put them, regardless of how the relationship is going, regardless of how she feels about him in the moment, he understands he's dealing with something different, something that won't bend just because he pushed on it. A woman with visible, consistent, emotionally stable standards doesn't feel like someone he can slowly renegotiate over time. She feels like someone he needs to actually show up for, because the alternative isn't an argument. It's just her, quietly, without drama, deciding he's no longer the right fit. And for a man who actually wants her, that quiet exit is significantly more terrifying than any heated confrontation ever could be. 6. Be genuinely happy without him. This one cuts deepest. Not because it's the most complicated strategy on this list, it's actually the simplest, but because it requires something most women in love find genuinely difficult to produce on demand. The real, visible, unbothered happiness that exists completely independently of whether he's showing up correctly or not. Not performed happiness, not the I'm fine that's obviously not fine. Actual joy, actual fulfillment, actual contentment that has nothing to do with his mood, his effort level, or the current temperature of the relationship. And that specific kind of happiness, the kind he didn't produce and can't take away, is quietly one of the most psychologically destabilizing things a woman can display to a man who has gotten comfortable. Here's the dynamic most people don't talk about honestly. When a man realizes that a woman's emotional state is directly tied to his behavior, he gains a very specific kind of power in the relationship, whether he wanted it or not. Her good mood becomes his achievement. Her bad mood becomes his leverage. And somewhere in that dynamic, without either of them planning it, he stops feeling like a partner and starts feeling like a remote control. He knows which buttons produce which responses, and things you can control don't scare you to lose. But a woman whose happiness has its own independent source, she's a completely different equation. Her good days don't require his input. Her weekends don't collapse in quality based on whether he called or didn't call. Her sense of self isn't running on the fuel he provides. It has its own engine. And a man who encounters that kind of emotional self-sufficiency for the first time in a relationship feels something he's not entirely prepared for. He feels optional. Not unwanted, optional. And for a man who actually loves a woman, optional is an extraordinarily uncomfortable place to be. Psychological research on relationship dependency consistently identifies emotional autonomy, the ability to maintain personal well-being independently of a partner's behavior, as one of the strongest predictors of long-term relationship satisfaction and partner investment. Simply put, the less a woman needs a man to regulate her emotional state, the more he works to be relevant to it. The dynamic flips completely. He stops being the source of her happiness and starts trying to earn a place in it. The practical version of this looks like having things in your life that genuinely light you up, that existed before him and continue to flourish regardless of relationship turbulence. The friendships that make you laugh until something hurts. The career or creative work that gives you a sense of purpose he had nothing to do with building. The solo routines, the morning runs, the weekend rituals, the quiet habits that keep you grounded in yourself when everything else is uncertain. These aren't just self-care talking points. They are the infrastructure of emotional independence. And emotional independence, when a man witnesses it up close, does something very specific to his fear of loss. It activates it completely. Because a man can convince himself that a woman who needs him won't leave, Her dependency is his insurance policy, but a woman who is genuinely thriving without him has no such dependency keeping her in place. She's there because she wants to be. She's choosing him from a full life, not clinging to him from an empty one. And a man smart enough to recognize that distinction understands immediately that her presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. That realization, once it lands, tends to change everything about how much effort he decides to make. Stop being so available. Build a life he can't fully access. Stop over-explaining yourself. Let your desirability be visible. Raise your standards out loud. Be genuinely happy without him. Master emotional withdrawal. Upgrade yourself consistently. And be willing, truly, soberly willing, to walk away. None of these work in isolation, but together they build something a man cannot ignore and cannot manufacture a replacement for. A woman who is so completely, authentically herself that losing her isn't just an inconvenience, it's an irreplaceable loss. And men who genuinely love a woman will move mountains to avoid that specific kind of loss. The goal was never to make him afraid. The goal was always to become someone worth being afraid to lose. There's a significant difference between those two things, and every single point on this list lives in that difference. If any of these 9 points hit differently for you today, if something on this list made you realize where you've been shrinking, overgiving, or making yourself too easy to take for granted, drop it in the comments. Be specific. Share what you're working on. This community exists for exactly that conversation, and every comment gets read. Many get responded to personally, because your growth genuinely matters here. If this video gave you something real today, do something with it. Like it, share it with a woman who needs to hear this, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. This content exists to give women the kind of honest, psychology-backed relationship clarity that nobody else is delivering this directly. New videos drop regularly. You don't want to miss what's coming next.